and I didn't record that. So I'm going to go back a little bit. So I had some problems with my computer, which distracted me. So I didn't record part of this presentation. And so just for the sake of others, I'm going to repeat and sum up some of this. So my camera's not working, and we're doing this study on Samuel Snow's letters. And we reviewed briefly what we would call the disappointment connected with August 11th, 1840, which was that they expected probation to close on August 11th, 1840, when the Turkish Empire fell. And they expected also the seventh trumpet to begin to sound, and they expected things like the plagues to fall, and all this that is shown in Revelation, the events that occur before the second coming. We also looked at the first disappointment. In the first disappointment, we know that the Millerites had expected Christ to return about the Jewish year 1843. But of course, there was different points within that year that they were looking for him to come. And then we looked at Samuel Snow's letters, and we're going to look at those now. And we're looking at his first letter. But we know that Samuel Snow had presented on December 31st, 1843 at the Boston Tabernacle, and that it was the next day that he decided that he was going to tell people that Jesus was coming back in the fall. And this was based upon his understanding of what had happened in 1843. One of their disappointments was that Jesus did not come back in the fall of 1843, as Miller had expected. And he based this upon the types. The spring types were fulfilled with the first coming, and the fall types were fulfilled with the second coming. So Samuel Snow, presenting his personal testimony on the last day of the Jewish year 1843, he has already understood what he's presenting here in this paper. And we're just going to go over that again briefly. I did already present a bit of it, but I'm going to have to reiterate it for those watching the video. So Samuel Snow had a series of letters in 1842 and 1843. There was 4 of them. If we're counting his speech, so there's really 3 letters, and then his personal testimony on December 31st. Now, he has just presented in this paper the 6,000 years of creation, showing that it began in the fall. And then he's going to deal with the 2520, the 7 times, which are 2520 full years. And he says they began with the breaking of the power of Judah at the captivity of Manasseh in 677. But what he wants to show is that in order to have 2520 full years, if you started on January 1st, 677, and you counted, and I wish I had my whiteboard, it would be easier to show. But if you counted, you would see that from all those years BC, if you started at any point in the year 677, when you get to AD 1, when BC, December 31st, 1 BC ends, January 1st, 1 AD begins, you would actually have to start from January 1st, 677 to go all the way to the end of BC 1, to December 31st, BC 1, to actually have 677 full years. And you would again need, from January 1st, AD, 1 AD, you would, to get to 1843 years, so to add those together to get 2520, you would have to go to December 31st, 1843. So he understood when he was giving his personal testimony on December 31st, he had already thought this through, and he realized that Jesus wasn't going to come back in the spring of 1844, because if you go to the Jewish year, which starts in the spring of 677, the only way that the 2520 would end in the spring of 1844 is if it had begun in the spring of 677 BC. And so he's going to show that it didn't begin in the spring. He's going to make all these arguments that these begin in the fall. Now, you're going to see that some of his arguments are faulty. And this, to me, is an extremely important point, that we often ignore. Not only are his arguments faulty in his first writing of what we would call the Midnight Cry message, but even in his publication on August 22nd, 1844, in a publication called The True Midnight Cry, he has a number of errors that are very significant. He just had some wrong ideas. And, you know, to recognize that God led a movement, even though they had wrong ideas, I think is extremely important, because we know that we have wrong ideas. And we know that because we've changed some of our ideas as we've gone along. We've come to greater understanding. We've had an increase of light. Our reform line began with the period of darkness, and we're proceeding to more and more light. The darkness still penetrates. It doesn't end on November 9th, 1989. Even though there's that period of darkness, there's an increase of light. And as that increase of light comes, it dispels the darkness. But the increase of light is continuous all throughout a reform line, because it's a three-step testing prophetic message. It prepares both people and a message, and it also distinguishes between the true and the false. It creates two classes of worshipers, presents those, demonstrates them. So in here he says, or had they begun on the first day of the Jewish year in 677, they could not end before the first day of the Jewish year in 1844. Now, if somebody does not have this document, you can always email me, theodorejamestourner@gmail.com. Theodore James Turner is all one word. And if you do that, I can send you this document, which is the Three Angels Messages source book, and also some of the other documents that we're going to be using in this study here. Unfortunately, you can't see me, which maybe is good, but we definitely need to be able to, you need to be able to see what's written here. And if you're watching this video and you can't see it clearly, just email me, and then you can go through the video while looking at the document yourself. So he's going to show this, that we have to have 1,843 entire years to make up the full period of 2520. Now, he's going to go through on it and try to explain how he believes that Manasseh was taken captive in the fall. Now, one of the things we know about what happened in 677 BC is we have S.R. Hayden's own document that says that he took Manasseh captive, along with 21 other kings, and carried them. It doesn't say exactly where, but it says actually he mustered them. The word there in Assyrian is the word that you would use when you gathering building materials, gathering slaves, or gathering armies. It means to muster. And so he actually mustered or brought together these kings, and then he sent them out to haul timbers to Nineveh to build his whatever you call it, palace in Nineveh. So the reason why he would have brought them to Babylon is he had just finished rebuilding Babylon. And so he had his captains go out and gather these kings. And what the Assyrians had, which later on the Babylonians also employed, was a protection racket. And in order to enforce that in protection racket, you had to make those people that were paying you money believe that you were the stronger power and you were the one able to protect them from whatever other powers there were. In this case, often it was Egypt. So Egypt was seeking protection money from the people in Palestine, as well as the king of Assyria. And so the king of Assyria had to demonstrate his power. So S.R. Hayden had united the Assyrian Empire with Babylon. He had rebuilt Babylon after his father had destroyed it, or his grandfather. So he was set up as the king of Babylon by his father, and he liked Babylon a lot, the city of Babylon, and so he rebuilt it. And so he would have brought all these kings there, and then he sent them out as basically slaves for a short period of time to do some manual labor to show how powerful he was. So this is something that's quite clear when you read the documents. Not everybody understands it that way. Some people don't see what what occurred there as a fulfillment of 2 Chronicles 33:11. But if you really compare that history, you'll see that that's when it occurred in 677. Now, he's going to try to show, though, that this was the fall. So normally when you had wars, you would begin them in the spring. Not always, but it was the best time to have a war, especially if you're going to besiege a city. You would do it before the harvest so that people didn't have food or had very little food stored in the city. And also you could feed your army. So the best time to go to war is in the spring. You surround a city, you take the crops, and you starve the people out. Now, what happened in the case of Manasseh is it's not actually an invasion of such, even though he talks about this invasion of Judah here in his notes. It's really just going to, sending some captains to Jerusalem and saying, Esarhaddon would like to see you, right? So this is the mafia boss sending out some of his goons to tell you, you got some kind of restaurant or something, the boss wants to see you, and that type of thing. So you can see the parallel between protection racket and how Assyria did things. And so he tries to argue it's in the fall, and I don't think that you could argue that. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that everything that he presents is not evidence that it actually occurred in the fall. It could have, but there's just not evidence of it. But that's one of the things that he really tries to argue, is that this all happened in the fall. And then he's going to go through the 2300 days. And he says here, the 2300 days of Daniel 8 began with the 70 weeks in BC 457, but they did not begin with the first day of that year. It is true that Ezra began to go up from Babylon on the first day of the first month, but this was not in the year 457 BC, but in the year BC 456. So he has made an error here. One is he has misread a chart dealing with Hale's chronology. He doesn't realize that he's actually dealing with, in Hale's chronology, with a 0 year. So there's a problem there. So he says the 7th year of Artaxerxes, in which Ezra went up, began, according to Dr. Hale's analysis of the chronology, in 457 and ended in 456. It has been the practice of chronologers to count the years of the reign of monarchs by the year in which they began to reign, making that their first year. Now, of course, this isn't true as well. That wouldn't be their first year. It would be their accession year. According to the year BC 457, in which the 7th year of Artaxerxes began, is counted as his 7th year. Now, this actually is complete gobbledygook if you actually try to work out what he's saying. Now, part of the thing is that we tend to not understand chronology. And this is true of the Millerites, that they often misuse their sources because they hadn't thought it through very carefully, or they hadn't visualized it properly. So he tries to argue that it's in the fall of 457 BC that this is put into effect. And I'm not going to go through his argument here, but you can see obviously it doesn't make sense if you read it. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't go into effect in the fall of 457, but the way that he explains it is completely wrong. And then he's going to deal with the end of the 2300 days. So he says it's going to be in the fall. And of course, he's correct. But his reasoning isn't correct. And he's going to go through these fullness of the year, or the entire year's argument, which is a fine argument. And then he's going to deal with the 1290 and the 1335 days. Of course, they begin together. And, he doesn't have any major change about that. It says, as it respects the 1290 and the 1335 days of Daniel 12, they must, of course, begin together, the latter ending with the 2300 and 1844. As there is a difference of only 45 years between the two periods, the 1290 days could not have ended in February 1798, as 46 years have passed since that time. The periods must have begun. Oh, so yeah, he does make a major change here. I forgot. So he actually tries to start this in 509, the 1290 terminating in 1799 with the commencement of Napoleon's career of blood and conquest. So one of the things you would see about this is that he has presented a number of ideas which are incorrect. He also dealt with, which I didn't look at here, but he doesn't have Artaxerxes as the one who makes this decree. He has it as Xerxes. So, I mean, it is Artaxerxes, but he looks as Ahasuerus in the book of Esther as Artaxerxes. So he makes a number of major blunders. Now, so when this is republished, so this was published, it was written February 16th, as you can see. When it was republished in the Signs on April 3rd, this might be a little more difficult to read because it's in italics and smaller print. But they say, the following article from the pen of Brother Snow, we republish at his request from the Midnight Cry of February 26, 1844. We can find no period for the termination of the prophetic times, but the Jewish year 1843, reckoning from the dates where the best chronologists have placed their commencement. The 6,000 years cannot be shown to require any additional time for their fulfillment. The captivity of Manasseh, at which we begin the 7 times, is placed by chronologists. In the Julian period, 4037. That has to do with the Julian day count. I'm not going to go into. From this point, 2520 years brings us down to the year of that period in 6557, which commenced on January 1st, AD 1844. But there's nothing to show that the time of the year of Manasseh's captivity, so we don't know when he was taken captive. The 7th year of Artaxerxes, from which we date the 2300 days, began according to Dr. Hales in BC 458 and ended in BC 457. So this is a point that may escape many people in how we understand Artaxerxes' reign. So the way that we look at it now is different than the Millerites looked at it. They would say, and correctly, that Artaxerxes' reign began in the spring of 458 BC. His 7th year ended in the spring of 457. Now, of course, this creates some problems because we know that Ezra left Babylon in the spring, on the first day of the first month, in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. And so they had various ways of trying to explain this. But the point is that if you go from the spring of 457, so they weren't putting it in the fall, they were saying that basically he just went with that decree that was given in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. But it creates a number of problems, the way that the Millerites understood it. So anyway, the point is that he has the same argument regarding the 70 weeks as he does with the 2300 years. In how it starts. Now, our brother has made a mistake of 1 year in his reference to Dr. Hales and may have been misled by the diagram in Brother Hales' Watchman's Last Warning, in which the same mistake was made. So when he says Brother Hales, that's not Dr. Hales. Brother Hales is Apollos Hale. So Apollos Hale had used Dr. Hales' chronology and published it in a chart, and it was misleading. Samuel Snow may have misunderstood it because the same mistake was made. Also, the 1335 days have not been shown to commence later than AD 508, and we therefore can find no time beyond the Jewish year 1843. So there's a number of points here that I think are important. The first one, of course, is we can see that there isn't a complete understanding. So we have an increase of light, and that light, even though it increases all the way up to August 22nd when he publishes his second paper on this topic, where he expands on this and removes some of his errors, but not all of them. God was still leading him. He's taking us from darkness and bringing us to light. We also see that there's this openness to examine things that they don't agree with, that they allow them to be presented before the people, as long as it's done in a right way. This isn't an antagonistic paper that he's writing. He's not calling down the leadership. He's making some suggestions, and they're willing to look at what he has to say. But he's, in a sense, leaving it in God's hands. What happens? Obviously, he's not pushing this issue. He's presenting what he believes, and they allow him to do so. Now, so that's his first letter. We're gonna go to this chart. So this chart here, if you're watching the video, you would need to get a copy of this. I'm just gonna zoom out a little bit, and I have to stop my share and then redo screen share so you can see this. Okay. So this is Samuel Snow's letters laid out on a line, and it can be rather confusing looking at this. One of the things you would see is that, I'm going to zoom into a bit more, is I have two lines. The top line is 1842, 1843, and 1844, but I've put them all in one year, and it just so happens the way that it's set up is I could put his letters in 1842 and 1843 because of when they were published. I can put them on this line here in a way that it looks continuous, but really I didn't put all of 1842 in there and all of 1843. I have the Hebrew months there, so people aren't necessarily familiar with them all, but you would see Tishri on the very far left, 1842. Tishri is the 7th month, Heshvan is the 8th, Kislev is the 9th, Tevet is the 10th, Shevet is the 11th, Adar is the 12th. Adar is the 13th month, so that's just second Adar, and Nisan is the 1st month. So I've managed to do this diagram where I kind of jam things in there, and I use those months there for different years. So it can be confusing. And in the box on the bottom left is the Samuel Snow's 4 articles, when they were published and when they were written. Of course, the 4th one is Samuel Snow's remarks on December 31st, 1843. So he didn't write that. And what we're going to look at now, what we started to look at is, and I'm going to zoom in on this a bit more again. So we're going to zoom. So you can see here we have in this box there, these are the 5 letters of Samuel Snow. 4 of them actually relate to the prediction of October 22nd, 1844. The second letter there, letter from Brother S.S. Snow, Signs of the Times, May 1st, 1844. That one's published in the Signs. All the other ones are published in the Midnight Cry. And you can see the Signs is actually on May 1st. And you can see the Midnight Cry is on May 2nd. So May 1st is a Wednesday, May 2nd is a Thursday. And he had no control over when his letters are published. And they always publish the Signs on Wednesday and the Midnight Cry on Thursday. So that becomes significant from a statistical probability point of view of how these things line up. Now, if we just look up a little bit, we can see there's his February 16th letter when it was written, the 26th day of the 11th month on the biblical calendar. And then it's going to be published here on the 13th day of the 12th month on the biblical calendar, 3rd day of the 12th month, pardon me, on February 22nd. Now this 3rd day of the 12th month becomes extremely significant, and I have done studies on this. It was the 3rd day of the 12th month in 515 BC, which was March 12th, which is the 3rd month, 12th day on the Julian calendar, that the temple was dedicated, the second temple was dedicated. And so I put that date there because this I had noticed back in 2014 or 15 and thought it was significant that we could take the biblical date in 515 BC, and if we inverted it, it would become the Julian date. And so these ideas of these dates, that they're connected in this structural or numeric way, was noticed a long time ago. Now, it's also, of course, the dedication of the temple, and it's the first publication of Snow's article. Now, if you look at April 3rd, so April 3rd, 1844, that's when it's republished in the Signs of the Times. Now, that date was the date in 1843 where the Rabbinic Jews and the Karaite Jews observed the Passover. So to them, it was the 14th day of the first month. But you can see it's actually the month V8R. It's the 12th month. So we recognize, based on the biblical calendar, that in 1844, a second Adar had to be added. But the Rabbinic Jews and the Karaites did not do that in 1844. And we know that based on dates on tombstones of Karaite Jews. And you can always tell it's a Karaite Jewish burial. And that when they put the dates on these tombstones in that year, they aligned up with the idea that Nisan 1 was March 21st in that year, which is too early for the year to begin because it's before the spring equinox. Even though we think of the spring equinox as March 21st, the thing is also you have to look at when the new moon would be sighted. It have to have been sighted on March 20th, which is actually before the spring equinox. So anyway, it's a rather complicated detail. But what I want you to see here is that there's this connection between this Passover and this dedication of the temple. If you look in Ezra chapter 6:15, you'll read about the dedication of the temple. And in Ezra 6:19, you'll read about the Passover that followed that. And so they're connected in that history in 515 BC, but they're also connected in Samuel Snow's letters from the two publication dates of his first letter. Now we can see, of course, we have April 19th, and then we're going to have the true Passover in 1844. And that happens to be the date in which I call his second letter, the May 2nd letter. And in that letter, he presents that Christ is crucified in the spring of 31 AD. And so we're going to look at that. So let's see if we can just do this. Yes. So this was what we call his second letter here. If you just look at this, this is one where he talks about the mockers. So this is after the first disappointment, and he talks about the mockers. But there's nothing here prophetically talking about his prediction of the 10th day of the 7th month. But his second letter, which is really his third, but his second letter relating to that is the May 2nd letter. And in this one, he uses some fake news called the Death Warrant of Jesus Christ. And I actually have a paper on this where I go through and show how this is obviously not a real document, that it is a fake. Lots of evidence that it's a fake. One is it says that when he gives the death decree, he's going to be crucified the next day. So, I mean, there's just so many historical inaccuracies in it. It's pretty obvious that it's fake. But anyway, he uses this, and based upon his main argument has to do with the 17th of the Emperor Tiberius Caesar in the 25th day of March. So one is it becomes on the wrong day of the week because whoever wrote the document originally didn't understand the biblical calendar and didn't understand when Jesus was crucified. And but also this argument from the 17th year of the Emperor Tiberius Caesar is actually incorrect in trying to understand this history as well. So there's all kinds of problems with it. But anyway, he tries to argue that it's 31 AD based upon this false document. Now, he happens to get it right. So the fact that he gets it right is in God's providence, not in his correct understanding. And this is an important point as well. When we look at Josiah Litch and his prediction regarding August 11th, 1840, we had seen that he actually used a faulty argument. That is, he started with July 27th, 1299, and he went to July 27th, 1840, and then counted 15 days. Now, in doing so, he had started with a Julian date and ended with a Gregorian date, so he didn't take into account the actual number of days. He should have either started with the Gregorian and followed all the way through, or started maybe with the Julian. But we found that the biblical calendar actually, if he had followed that, he would have arrived at August 11th for the end of the 391 years and 15 days. So God in his providence has overruled man's lack of understanding in order to give us the right time. There's no doubt that we have a lack of understanding. We don't know everything. I've tried my whole life to learn and understand everything. And the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know of what there is to know. And I constantly find that my understanding is, it's just not enough. And even if you put all of our minds together and all the things that we understand, it's still very little. And we have lots of wrong ideas. But God overrules those things. And that's the thing that I find comforting and also characteristic of how God has worked with humanity. Humanity and divinity combined do not commit sin, right? It's not sin to be wrong. You can't know what you don't know. Sin is when a person intentionally goes against God's will and disobeys him. If he does something because of a lack of understanding or a misunderstanding, that's not sin. That's just human. But God overrules those things with his divinity and creates truth. And this is a principle that we have to understand as Seventh-day Adventists, because so often as Seventh-day Adventists, we look at Adventist history and we whitewash it. And people do that also with the Bible. But when I became a Christian and I read the Bible, one of the things I noticed about it is that the Bible was different than any other religious book in that it didn't whitewash humanity. It showed humanity for what it was. It showed me for who I was. It didn't try to make me look good. It didn't try to make the people in the Bible look better than they were. It was about God's character, not about man's character, being good. So we see this here, that God is overruled in Samuel Snow's understanding of the chronology so that he gets the correct year. Now, the interesting thing about this, as you will see, is that he's presenting this chiasm, that Christ is crucified in the midst of the week. Now, we know that, again, this would be really helpful to have the whiteboard, but we had drawn on the whiteboard in previous ones where we showed that William Miller believed that Jesus was crucified at the end of the 70th week in the spring of 33 AD. And of course, he didn't take into account at that time, there was no 0 year, but he believed that it was fulfilled exactly to the day, and he had a wrong date as well. He had the 12th day of the first month for Jesus' crucifixion. Now, Samuel Snow presents the idea that's accepted by Seventh-day Adventists now, is that Jesus was crucified in the middle of the week, in the midst of the week. So the 70th week begins in the fall of 27 AD and ends in the fall of 34 AD. And Jesus is crucified in the spring, 3.5 years from the beginning of the 70th week and 3.5 years before the end of the 70th week. So this idea, of course, is accepted by Adventists, but it was presented to Adventism by Samuel Snow. It's interesting, too, that this very point became his stumbling block. One of the reasons that he ended up believing he was Elijah, and it has to do with his belief about that he was this prophet based upon he had already prepared that there was a prophet going to come, and he believed he was this prophet because he had brought this light. And in reading his other books, he still continues to refer to this death decree article as a basis for a lot of his beliefs, even though it's wrong. So we have to be willing to let go of wrong ideas as we advance. Now, this is the letter from Miller, which happens to be published also on May 2nd in 1844. And this is the one that we read last week where he basically reiterates his view that the earth is going to be destroyed by fire. And even though that they were wrong about the time, he's not wrong about the event. And so when it comes to the first disappointment, as we call it, we can see that they were wrong about the time, but the event they were not wrong about. So this was written in Lohampton, May 2nd, 1844. Now, we are then going to have Samuel Snow's third letter. So his third letter is written on Pentecost. And so I'm just going to switch back to this. And you can see here, dear brethren of the Advent faith, that's his, what I call his second letter, May 2nd. And then dear brother Southard, June 22nd, 1844 is when it was written. And it was published June 27th, 1844. And if you take the date it was published, which the date it was written was on the biblical calendar, Pentecost, which is the 6th day of the 3rd month. And so it was published on the 11th day of the 3rd month, 5 days later. And if you double that date, you get the 22nd day of the 6th month, which is the date it was written on the Gregorian calendar. So this is something I've referred to before. But it's something very interesting about this Pentecost letter. Now, in the Pentecost letter, he's just reiterating some of his views dealing with the start of the prophetic periods. Now, in 2017, and this is sort of what I really need the whiteboard for, but I'm going to have to, once I get the camera fixed, tomorrow I will go through some of this again and draw it out. So, but in 2017, when we came to understand Samuel Snow's letters, at that time we were talking about a thing called the PBM, or the prediction before midnight. And this is something that was set aside by Parminder. He said that he didn't understand it. He never openly attacked it that I saw, but he just disregarded it. And he did this with a number of things, even with Samuel Snow's letters themselves. He would just say he doesn't understand it. But he ultimately really rejected it. Now in 2018, Elder Jeff was presenting Samuel Snow's letters because he saw it the year later, how significant they were. And we're going to see that when we go through this tomorrow. We're going to lay this out. We're going to lay out Samuel Snow's letters, and we're going to look at the structural chiasms that exist within them. We're just not going to be able to do that today. It's too hard for me to do this without a whiteboard, but we can at least get this foundation on Samuel Snow's letters here. So we can see that his third letter, which I have here labeled number 4, just because of the second letter. This third letter, which is the Pentecost letter, has a symbol of organization. That is, we were in the PBM and we had, Tabo was presenting May 2nd letter as the prediction before midnight. But as we looked at all these letters, we saw that there was this Pentecost letter. And in 2017, we were working at organization. So I was presenting in September of 2017 at the School of the Prophets, Samuel Snow's letters. I was also presenting, of course, biblical chronology. So as usual, I bit off a little bit more than I could chew there, but I was presenting a lot of information. But the focus was to give this chronology so that we could get to Samuel Snow's letters. And so that people could understand what was being talked about. That was the reason why I went through all the biblical chronology. But I think I gave people too much information, really for them to appreciate what was happening. But anyway, Samuel Snow's letters became extremely significant in that context. And because we were now going through this organization, and I could see that we were moving through this history. And what we had, the main point that I tried to point out was that his April 3rd publication of his first letter has a disclaimer on it. And this represents the Passover of the false priests. That is, it's the false Passover. The May 2nd letter is the true Passover, and it presents the chiasm with Christ in the center. And then the Pentecost letter is where I believed that we were moving towards, that we had passed May 2nd, that we had had the separation in the movement, and that we were now moving towards Pentecost, towards organization. And this made sense in the context then. Now I can look back and see, and I understand much more clearly, the significance of the letters and how they relate to this movement and who we are, because we're Samuel Snow, and these letters represent this movement. And it represents this movement after 9/11. So we're going to see that clearly. I just can't draw it on the whiteboard right now. So we will look at that tomorrow. I will have the camera fixed. I'll have this all up and running properly. And then he's going to have his final letter. Now that one's called Confirming the Covenant. So there's a lot of significance in the topics that are discussed in these papers. But that letter is published on July 18th. And of course, back in 2017, we didn't know that July 18th would become the date that we would predict in 2020. That as we weren't even looking at predicting dates. But as we were studying the prediction before midnight, and as I was looking at Samuel Snow's letters, we had this argument that May 2nd was the prediction before midnight. But one of the things about July 18th is it's 3 days before midnight. And Tabo had presented that 3 days was a symbol of the prediction before midnight. So it didn't make sense to have May 2nd as the symbol of the prediction before midnight. Now what happened is, as I was studying this, I looked at all of these dates in this context of when the letters were written and when they were published, and every date was significant. Even in the writing of his fourth letter, or what we call his fifth here, June 22nd in 1844, it was the 13th day of the third month, of course. But if we look down below, these are the dates in 457 BC. Now, I haven't even really explained what's happening on the bottom here, so I'm going to have to explain that. And I'll draw this out all again tomorrow so you can see it step by step. But Pentecost was June 22nd to June 29th in 457 BC. So that June 29th date has a significance. The only date that didn't, that I could not find any significance for, was the writing of his first letter. And now I've said this story before, but I came to my wit's end. Basically, I had been struggling with this for about a week, trying all different kinds of things to understand why that first letter, when it was written, wasn't significant, why that date wasn't significant. And that night when I went to bed, I prayed about it, and I dreamed that night, all night, I was going through trying to figure out the significance of it. I was changing it into Roman numerals. I was doing all kinds of things in my sleep in this dream, which went on all night, tossing and turning, dreaming about this February 22nd or February 16th date. And then I was told in my dream to double it. And so if we look at the date, February 16th, we would write that as the second month, 16th day, if we wrote it on our calendar. Now, in doing so, what I did is I then took that as a symbol and I wrote second month, 16th day, second month, 16th day, and I added them together. And I got fourth month, 32nd day. Now, of course, there is no 32nd day in April, but if I just continued going on, I would find that I came to May 2nd. That is, if I add February 16th to February 16th, I get May 2nd, which brings me to the second letter, to the Pentecost letter, the chiasm letter, the one that deals with this chiasm. And then I was told to double it again. So I added to May 2nd, which would be 5/2, I added 2/16, and then I got 7/18. And that is the writing of his last letter, or the publication, pardon me, of his last letter. And so it created a chiasm. The interesting thing is that May 2nd is the center of this chiasm. And that's the topic of the May 2nd letter, is the chiasm of Christ's 70th week. So that was very significant. It's also, if we were to count it, it's 77 days and 77 days, counting February 16th as the first day. Altogether, if you just counted normally a cardinal way from February 16th to July 18th, it's 153 days. And the number 153 is significant. But I wasn't told in the dream to add the days in that way. I was told to double February 16th. So this became, to me, from a personal point of view, a sign that God was leading in this, but also the fact that it worked out in this amazing structure. Now, we should know, of course, from the first day of the first month, April 19th, to October 22nd, the 10th day of the seventh month, is a period of 187 days, which is also a symbol of July 18th. And we also learned this year, I believe it was, that if we added the first day of the first month, the fifth day of the fourth month, and the first day of the fifth month, and the 10th day of the seventh month together as just numbers, that would be 11 plus 54 plus 15 plus 107, we would also come to the number 187. And so that shows us that our main waymarks, 9/11 being the first day of the first month, midnight, midnight cry, and October 22nd, or the Sunday law, those waymarks that we had in 2016 had finally nailed down, that they actually symbolize 187. Now, we also know that there's this chiasm in the center. The fifth day of the fourth month is the center of this 187 days. And that, of course, symbolizes the number 54. Now, without going into a study on the bottom, but if you look at 457 BC and Ezra's journey from Babylon to Jerusalem, there's these periods of 3 days. And these periods of 3 days, so you can look at my studies on Ezra where I go into in detail, or you can simply go to Ezra 7 to 10 and look at the dates and write them out on a line. But you can see here these periods of 3 days. You have 3 days here by Nisan, and that's 3 days that they're at the river Ahava. You have 3 days here after they get to Jerusalem, before they deliver the gold and silver to the temple. And then the 3 days, the call to repentance in Jerusalem. And that we can create chiasms here. And this first chiasm, where Pentecost happens to be the center, is periods of 54 days, that is ordinal and cardinal, that make up a period of 107 days. And we know that 54 is the symbol of the fifth day of the fourth month, and 107 is the symbol of the 10th day of the seventh month. So even in 457 BC, you have this structure. Now, in understanding some of the things that we have studied, that we have applied to the July 18th prediction, one of the things you'll see here, that long before we were time setting as such, is that we were looking at these events in fulfilled prophecy and seeing these structures and seeing these coincidences, not mere coincidences, but actually things where God has placed these symbols in a very, very powerful way that helps establish our understanding of these prophecies. The study on Ezra 7 to 10 is something that you can present to a Seventh-day Adventist that has nothing in it that he can object to on any rational way. He would see that it establishes that the start of Christ's ministry in the holy place is marked by a chiasm, Pentecost, and that the start of Christ's work in the most holy place is also marked by a chiasm. By just taking the dates that are given, the biblical dates that are given in Ezra 7 to 10. You don't need to convert them into any calendars. You can just take the dates themselves and you can count them out, and you can demonstrate that these chiasms exist. And then you can also look at Millerite history, where the 2300 days ends, and you can show that these dates, the first day of the fifth month, for instance, we know is significant in Millerite history, and the first day of the first month, of course, as well. but that you can show these chiasms and that you can point these things out very clearly and very simply. It doesn't have to be as complicated as I've made it here, to show this to people. And you can just easily do a study on Ezra 7 to 10 in an hour and a half Bible study, just going through it really slowly, letting people read the verses, letting them draw the conclusions, letting them do the math, because it's not very complicated math, and then showing them these things. And it's very, very powerful when you do that. So we know we have Samuel Snow's letters, and we have these chiasms. There's 2 chiasms in 457, and there's 2 chiasms in 1844, one dealing with his letters themselves, the other one dealing with midnight as being the center. Now, what we're going to show next time is we're going to show what happened in our history in 2018. So to understand our disappointment and where it lies in the context of Millerite history, we have to compare it to Millerite history. And people have made a mistake in how, many people have made a mistake in how they've assessed where we are in the lines and who we are in the lines. And so when we look at July 18th in Samuel Snow's letter, it precedes midnight. Samuel Snow's letters precede midnight. It's about a prediction before midnight. And I would argue that we haven't got to midnight yet. Now, in the line of the priests, we did in a typical way. But we aren't to midnight yet in the line of the Levites. And that's what we have to understand is also that line of the Levites, where they are. And we can clearly show that the line of the Levites precedes the Sunday law, and that it ends with the Sunday law. And October 22nd is the Sunday law. And if we're going to compare the Levites with a group, we have to compare them with the Millerites. That's the group that we have to look at. When we compare the priests, we have to compare them with Samuel Snow, because Samuel Snow and Ezekiel are the same person, and they're us. We are Samuel Snow in that context. Now, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's really the simple way of looking at it. And just trying to see the time here. So we have about 12 minutes left. Are there any questions regarding this? Samuel Snow's letters. I know we could have read all the letters, but we obviously don't have time, but I suggest that people do that. And I suggest that you try to draw them out on a line. We have all the information there. But is there any questions that people don't understand about Samuel Snow's letters? Or any comments about them?
One question.
Okay.
Okay. Further, after the publication of Snow's letters, James White had some comments about Samuel Snow. And he was commenting more that, Samuel Snow seemed to be a little bit of a strange person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was it because that Snow had separated himself from the main body of believers after October 22nd, 1844, or was this a situation that White was more concerned that there were things that Snow was saying that he personally didn't agree with?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. Now, do you have the statement? Can you send it to me on where he talks about Snow?
I'll get it to you, yes.
There's one thing I know is Ellen White doesn't actually mention Snow by name. At least I haven't been able to find that she has. So it'd be interesting to see what he has to say. But the thing about Snow is I believe it, whether I'm just speculating here, I don't know, I wasn't there. But based on what he has written and how he has his thinking process, which is the thing that I do as a teacher, I'm aware of how people think by how they communicate, because I have to do that teaching guitar. I have to understand the way that people think. I would think that Samuel Snow was probably a bit of an oddball. Um, who knows? Maybe he had autism, type of Asperger's or something like that. He writes in a way and he thinks in a way that is a little bit unusual, and that may be what he's referring to. But sometimes, God uses people like that to see things that other people can't see. So there's obviously a role for all these different types of people. But definitely, when you look at his later work, he has a distorted view of reality. He would present himself really contrary to the way that he was. He would try to, and it's quite interesting, his conflicts that he had with leadership, especially after October 22nd, 1844, are really dishonest. And anybody reading that would easily see that he's being dishonest about what he is saying and what he's doing. That is, he has an agenda, which is quite clear, but he thinks that he's hiding that agenda. That is, he doesn't really have the ability to hide his motivation. It's really, really clear. I'll maybe send people one of his books in a PDF form. I'll send that in the email, so you can read some of his arguing and his rationalizations that he uses. And one of the things that I think we have to do when we look at these characters, whether it's in the Bible and we look at the imperfections of people, is we have to look at ourselves as well. So we shouldn't stand in judgment of them and say, oh, that they were this and they were that. Whoever it is, we have to try to say, do I have that in my character as well? And I can say, and this maybe isn't the best thing to say, but I can see a lot of defects in my character that are very similar to some of these people like Samuel Snow. That is, I can see my nature in that. And I've tried to guard very carefully, those parts of my nature that tend in a certain direction. One is I look at the world quite differently than other people. So I probably have mild Asperger's. Then my dad had it. One of my sons has it for sure. Another one even probably has it. And even one of my daughters may have it. It's all possible. Which makes me a little bit of a social misfit. And I had to learn, how to teach and sell things and interact with people. But I bring this up just as a point, not so much about me, but just that we're so ready to see the faults of others and to see where others were to blame, especially in the past, and to make condemnation and judgments about people, when actually what we tend to see in other people is really the things in ourselves that we're unwilling to see. And I see this on, obviously I see it in other people much more than I see it in myself, right? No, we need to see it in ourselves, but I see this when I'm on WhatsApp, is that often people will have these judgments and these criticisms about other people. Sometimes it's veiled a little bit, but yet they're doing the same things. And so we have to be really careful about that. None of us have a position where we can just say, light came to me, so now I'm valuable. Now I'm somehow indispensable. God may use us, but we can never let that go to our heads. We can never let it make us think that we are somehow better than our brethren. And a lot of the false doctrines that are discussed, a lot of conspiracy theories and so forth, are things that we use to lift ourselves above other people, to make us think that we're better than we really are. And if we just understand that we're just dust, that without God's Spirit, we're dead, and that we need God every day, then we can, as a movement, move ahead. But we can't be talking about who's the greatest. We can't be putting down other people. We can't be blaming other people for things that we believe and that we're responsible for. And that's one of the lessons I've learned from studying Samuel Snow. I've looked at Samuel Snow, and I've seen the aspects of my character that are the same. Maybe some people may use that against me and say, oh, well, you're like Samuel Snow. You're going to go off into fanaticism. But I think that I can at least look at that and recognize aspects of my character that could be just like that. Somebody uses that against me, that's fine. But I use it as a way to check myself. And that's what we should always be doing. So we as a movement are Samuel Snow. If we understand that, that means we're like Samuel Snow. We're a little bit odd. You know, we're seeing things the way that other people don't see things. And we have a little bit of superiority because God has used us to give light to others. And we can't allow that to let us go off track. We can't allow that all that God has done to somehow think that we're better. And I think that's been the reason why we've had this disappointment. Because I really think that as a movement, we were not prepared for the responsibility that we thought God was going to give us. And that's one of the lessons we can learn from Samuel Snow. So anyway, we're going to close, unless somebody has a comment, we're going to close with prayer. But tomorrow I'm going to draw some of this stuff out and illustrate some of the things that I talked about here in a little bit more detail. And try to understand, and then we're going to look at the great disappointment. We're going to look at what that great disappointment was and what it meant and how it was reacted to and how that parallels our time in regard to July 18th. So any final comments before we close with prayer? Okay. So let's kneel for prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful. We are thankful for the lessons that we can learn from the past. We're thankful for the way your Holy Spirit works upon our hearts and convicts us of our sin. We're thankful, Lord, for the light that has shone from the past upon our path. And we're thankful for the desire that you have given us to walk in that light. We pray for each person who's studying, who's watching, who's listening to your voice. We just pray, Lord, that you can help us to see through this darkness with this light on our path. Help us to walk by faith and not by sight. Help us to trust in you. We pray for the WhatsApp discussion. We know that people have brought in ideas that cause division and really are to no profit. We just pray, Lord, that you can help us to not get caught up in a spirit of superiority and self-justification. Help us, Lord, to recognize our weaknesses and to look to you for strength. Thank you for allowing the video not to work today so that we could focus upon Samuel Snow's letters and the various things you wanted to teach us. And thank you for all your providences and leadings. And be with us all, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. So I can't wave goodbye.
Theodore, are you going to buy a new laptop then?
Well, this is a new laptop. So I don't think so.
Oh.
I need to get a camera, though, is really what I need to do. So I need to get a camera so that instead of using my laptop camera, I have a proper camera. And, I got a microphone now. So the sound is better, but I still need to get some proper equipment, which I'm planning to do. So I'm planning to get some.
Because I don't mind helping sending some money if you need to buy some more
Yeah, well,
equipment.